Welcome to BB 101 course at IIT Bombay. Professor Srivastava is going to deliver his lecture in Molecular and Cellular Biology module shortly. Please mute your microphone and be ready with pen and notepad to take notes. Thank you. Welcome to BB 101 course at IIT Bombay. Please mute your microphone and be ready with pen and notepad to take notes. Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Today we are here for lecture 3, the live interaction for the batch D3, D4. And I'm going to take the questions for the cell cycle and metabolism, these two lectures, lecture 2 and 3. But before I do that, these are the outline of what we have planned for this hour. I'll just give you some salient features or the important points of the cell cycle because many questions are from that. And then many of your questions which you have asked me, those we will write reply. Again, we'll take Q&A for the metabolism and some of the key points for the metabolism which you should keep in mind. You also had few queries regarding the first quiz, which I will give you some overview on that. And at the end, which is the main activity for you today, is the quiz 2 based on the cell cycle lecture. So I'm not going to repeat everything what we spoke in the previous lecture, but at least I will refresh you with some of the key concepts or the main points of the cell cycle. But before we do that, we have discussed about prokaryotes and eukaryotes. And during that context, it became interesting discussion that how eukaryotic cells acquired organelle like mitochondria and chloroplast, why they are double membranous, why they have their own genome, and why they have this kind of peculiar organelle nature as compared to any other organelle in the cell. To address these questions, there are several scientists, they tried many hypotheses. The one which looks closest to work is essentially endosymbiotic theory by Lynn Margulis, which essentially conveys that probably there was an aerobic bacterium which has capability of performing oxidative phosphorylation. When it came in touch with the eukaryotic primitive cell, it got engulfed, and then over the process of billions of years time scale, which we are talking for evolution, it led to finally mitochondria. Given that there are two membranes here, one membrane, the inner membrane, comes from the bacteria or the prokaryotic origin. Outer membrane comes from the eukaryote because that's what is during the engulfing, the invasion is happening like that. So the two membranes have a different nature, and that is important to keep in mind. Similarly, another bacteria could be cyanobacteria, any other bacteria which has capability of doing photosynthesis, got engulfed with the this primitive cell, and then eventually led to the generation of chloroplast. And again, it is also having similar features from the outer membrane and inner membrane, two different origin. So both of these organelles have similar nature, and that's why the hypothesis went in that favor. People also tried some other experiments to try to prove that, and many things supported this hypothesis. In terms of the cell cycle, the overall cell cycle alternates between interphase and the mitotic phase. Interphase is having three major activities: the G1 phase, S phase, and G2 phase. While the cell is trying to prepare for itself for the DNA replication to happen in the S phase, the G1 phase prepares for that. So makes the cell ready for that. That is the first phase of the interphase. After the activities are complete in G1 phase with the G1 checkpoint, it then moves to the S phase when the chromosome duplication happens. Then cell moves to the G2 phase, which is the last part of the interphase. And once the this activity is complete, now cell is ready for performing the mitosis to get duplicated into two daughter cells. and then the cytokinesis will happen to make it two daughter cells, cytoplasm also going to be distributed. So in for the mitosis, then we had 5 phases from the prophase, pro-metaphase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase, and cytokinesis. Um, since the chromosome duplication has happened in the S phase, now there is sufficient chromosome material is there, so it starts getting condensed. The chromatin formation happens, and from there, slowly they start, these chromosomes which are having chromatids now. These are start aligning to the metaphase plate, and after that alignment is done, then they start getting separated. These chromatids of each chromosome start getting separated towards the two poles, and there are different set of proteins and enzymes involved in that. Especially cohesins are the one which are keeping them together. And now when the repulsion has to happen, this set of enzymes like separases, they are involved to do this repulsion. Again, the cohesin complex has multiple proteins which plays important role in that. And after this repulsion has been broken, now they are moving to two different daughter cells. Then the either the cleavage furrow or the cell plate being formed to make it two different daughter cells. Then we discussed about the key differences or the salient points of mitosis and meiosis. Mitosis we talked in some detail, but meiosis we only looked at the key point which are different from the mitosis. So here the major point was that if we are looking at the diploid cell, which is having 2n equal to 6, 3 from each parent, 3 chromosomes coming from father, 3 from mother. In the mitosis, chromosome duplication happens, whereas in case of meiosis, now these homologs are being formed, and these pair of homologs, they are going to exchange their genetic material in a process known as crossing over, and that cross is known as chiasmata. So therefore, now some of the genes from the paternal and maternal genes will exchange, and that's where we see heterogeneity in the progeny. So now, in case of mitosis, these duplicated chromosomes, they are going to get adhered on the metaphase plate. They're going to align on that, and then move on to separate into two daughter cells in the anaphase and telophase. So now the ploidy level remains the same. It started from 2n equal to 6, remains 2n equal to 6, but two daughter cells are produced here. In case of meiosis, the key major differences are that chiasmata was being formed, which is exchanging the genetic material. Then rather than moving the individual chromosomes at the metaphase, now there are pair of homologs from the both blue and red chromosome together. They are moving on metaphase plate in meiosis 1. Meiosis, another point to keep in mind that we have two different stages of meiosis, meiosis 1 and meiosis 2. Meiosis 1, just prior to that, we have an interphase, which is like mitosis. And after the meiosis 1 is complete, now cell is going to perform meiosis 2, which is like mitosis, which is just going to duplicate the whole cell. So there is no separate second interphase involved before meiosis 2. So I hope you are just trying to connect the dots and keep in mind the most salient features of these differences. Then these homologs, they are going to separate in the further anaphase, telophase, and then the daughter cells are being formed from meiosis 1, which after another round of separation with the meiosis 2 or mitosis is going to form 4 daughter cells. Each is having half the chromosome number. So these are the key differences, that here we only 2 diploid cells being formed. Here you got 4 cells, but these are haploid. In terms of the checkpoints of different part of the cell cycle regulation, we had 3 different checkpoints, one in the G1, other at the end of G2, and third in the M checkpoint. So the G1 checkpoint ensured that now a cell has sufficient material for it to proceed for the DNA replication activities to happen. And after DNA replication has completed, cell has moved to G2, and now it is ensuring that everything is fine. Now it can proceed for cell division to happen. And once cell division happens, then it again makes sure that now division is completed, and it can proceed for the next round of interphase. So these checkpoints are important, but these are the 3 checkpoints in the cell cycle. How cell is going to conceive that what is right, what is wrong? It is through the set of molecules, which are essentially kinases. These are the set of proteins or enzymes, which is involving the transfer of different phosphate molecules. They are going to bind to them or going to release them in the process known as phosphorylation or dephosphorylation. So that is very important, but we have not gone in that level of detail. Just to simplify this, in the S phase, there is a set of proteins being synthesized or produced. Those are known as cyclin proteins. Whereas cyclin dependent kinases, these are proteins present throughout the cell cycle. So after the S phase is complete, which means now the chromosome duplication has already happened, DNA replication is complete. So as a marker of that, cyclin proteins are also produced along with that. So now you got abundance of cyclin proteins at the end of the S phase. Now those S phase are going to bind to the CDKs, cyclin dependent kinases, and that complex being formed, which is the cyclin and CDK complex. After that, it's going to allow to move for the mitosis to happen. Mitosis is finished, then CDK and cyclin going to dissociate. Cyclins are going to get degraded. And again, the next round of the interphase starts. When the cell is ready for the S phase, cyclins are going to again synthesize. So synthesis of cyclin proteins as well as their degradation is very crucial here to indicate the different phases, whether the cell has reached to S phase, completed S phase, or reached to M phase and completed mitosis or not. So these points I hope is clear with this particular diagram. We had also spoken about the different type of cloning. While I will not talk everything right now, but cloning of plants, especially few specialized cells in the plant have capacity to de-differentiate, give rise to any type of specialized cells. Those are known as totipotency or totipotent cell. And I gave this example of carrot. When you take these root cells and when you grow them in the culture medium, which is providing the nutrients for to these cells, but also you add some exogenous hormones like gibberellic acid and cytokinin. Those led to the shoot and root growth that helps to make it the full plant from the cell. But the actual animal cloning experiments were possible because of the experiment done by Sir John B. Gurdon in 1950s. And he took a frog egg cell, did the UV treatment to so that the nucleus is removed from that, degraded, and now the E-nucleated egg cell, which is the empty cell egg cell, he's going to add the nucleus from two different conditions. So condition A was he took from the early embryonic stage of the frog some less differentiated cells and just took a nucleus from that and put that in this particular E-nucleated egg cell. Or he took another tadpole, which is now slightly advanced, and took that cell and then the skin of that and used that nucleus to try to put in this particular E-nucleated egg cell. After doing this, then now he's looking at what is the output of these experiments. In one experiment, when he took the early embryonic less differentiated cells, the many tadpoles were formed, almost 98% success was achieved. When he used the more developed stages, and that resulted into less tadpoles from this particular experiment, only less than 2% eggs developed into the tadpole. So that showed that probably the early embryonic stage cells or less differentiated cells are capable of doing this type of cloning. Now let me take some of your Q&A first from the forum, then I will come to you directly here in the class as well. Yeah, so one question is that regarding endosymbiotic theory, that of course it's an interesting topic to learn how eukaryotes and these cells evolved from the prokaryote. But other than curiosity, is there anything else relevant to know about them? Why they are like this manner, right? Yeah, I think, many times, let me just take you for a minute on a separate topic. Viruses are doing a lot of recombination all the time, right? There are different, almost all the viruses are doing recombination, and group of SARS viruses are doing more recombination as compared to anything else. Now, as long as they're not putting a lot of harm to human, we should hardly bother about what is happening in the viruses, right? And whether there are some viruses of SARS family which are doing infection in the bats, they are doing also in other type of animals, especially pigs, like that, right? So till human is infected, we should not bother for doing research on that. But that should not be the case ideally, because There are a lot of virologists, there are a lot of people in different infectious disease area, and also in the CDC of US, which looks for all kind of infectious disease control. They keep doing this kind of research, variety of ways of looking at possibilities of how these viruses are doing evolution over the time, and they are evolving into new strains. What is the possibility that if you take SARS strain from the pig versus you take from bat, if you take those genome, you do recombination of that, what kind of new strain can develop, right? So all those are the possible things which are keep happening. Like on one hand, virus evolutions are happening. On the other hand, scientists are doing research to try to understand those and trying to put those ideas forward. And those things are so relevant, so important, that at the time of these kind of pandemic and this situation, those knowledge only comes forward, because in such a short time you cannot start doing research. So basic science research has its own value, and it only pays off once in a while in the long term. And something like this, our current situation, is definitely giving us all that insight that basic science research, biological research, understanding fundamentals are really important, right? In this case, of course, understanding the multicellular complex of eukaryotes are very important, because many times you will find there are some defects coming from the mitochondria, there are some defects coming from other organelle. And what makes these organelles slightly different, if we understand it better, then probably we can come up with the better ways of treatment modalities. Like I just showed you one video clip in the beginning about the three parent combination to look for a proper baby, where it can be removed the mitochondrial defects. And so those kind of things are already getting approved on UK and other places. In which way now you can understand that which mitochondria has defect and how you can overcome those by involving more surrogate parents. So understanding the eukaryotic cell complexes, of course, is not only curiosity but also important, because it can lead to many of the potential output in terms of the therapies, and also, as I said, for the viral research, how these kind of things can pay us a lot in the pandemic time or any kind of crisis time. But just for your information, we have put down a couple of points that why understanding this is important to know that what was the origin of these eukaryotic cell with the different type of prokaryotes. I already spoke about it, that aerobic bacteria gave rise to mitochondria potentially, and the cyanobacteria or any kind of photosynthetic bacteria gave rise to chloroplast. But again, you have more of these points to relate to the need for doing this kind of research. How did the just let me move around. Uh, how did the earlier eukaryotes exist without mitochondria? Means before the engulfment of this type of bacteria, aerobic bacteria. So, see, on one hand, cell like this kind of primitive cell of or eukaryote would have felt the need to have this kind of bacteria to be part of it, right? That's why it became symbiotic relationship. It is giving space to live, like you are giving somebody a room on the rent to live, and you are trying to gain something in return as well from them, right? So in this case here, the cell is trying to get some energy from this particular bacteria, and found it very useful. That's why it gave it a shelter and space now permanently to locate there. Of course, prior to that, there must have been, some inefficient ways of mode of energy, which is definitely no exact answer to these questions. We are talking about 3.5 and 4.5 billion years ago. During those time, what may have happened? One could just learn from the other type of organisms, and few names are mentioned here that where one could look into different type of sulfur mobilization system from this bacteria, monocidocarbonides, which is example of a eukaryote without mitochondria. So some of these are, examples which say that even cells could live without mitochondria, and there might have been earlier as well some cells which were existing without mitochondria, but those were quite, low efficient microbes, which probably were not sufficient for it to give the entire ATP and energy. That's where then cell took these aerobic bacteria and they became part of it. Again, many of these things are just interesting read and interesting discussion. You can read some of these research articles as well. There is no one conclusive answer to this question. In metaphase 1, will the chromosome from the parental side align, or one side of the metaphase plate and the paternal of the other, or will it be mixed? So Yeah, in this particular part of the, when we talk about metaphase uh, one, even here as well, if you're looking at meiosis one, probably, uh, they are going to just align over there, and they are not going to get mixed over there, because whatever interchange was happening, if you are referring to meiosis one, interchange of the some of the genetic component has already happened with the chiasmata and the crossing over. So now they are just simply getting aligned irrespective of the position of the other chromosomes. So whether the red one has got some blue and blue one has got some red, it does not matter. They are going to just get aligned on that. Why do memory cells in the Dolly experiment undergo de-differentiation when starved? So good, you are thinking, slightly more than what we talked. But these are the actually a really key important point of those experiments which led the development of Dolly, and why Dr. Ian Wilmot and his experiments were very successful, because they really understood the cell cycle very well. They understood that you have to keep the cell slightly in the prolonged time at the cell arrest stage, which is the GO stage. So the G1, like by now, the G1s and G2 phase, which is leading for the interphase. But for some time, if you can, arrest the cell at the GO stage, it means it is not progressing for the entire interface to proceed. So then you are trying to reprogram the nuclear architecture. And that actually, after a lot of optimization with the experiments, really helped Dr. Wilmot and his team to do the reprogramming of the nuclear architecture, which help through a series of other proteins known as beta integrin. But of course, those are beyond the scope of the whole class and discussion here. You can read some of this paper if you have more interest. I'll be also happy to talk to you in detail if you have any specific question in this context. In CC cat experiment, since the offspring's cat did not have the features of classic calico cat, was it considered like a new breed? So I think very interesting observation here. It was different, right? It was not identical, but it was not very different either, and it was not very stable. Which one would say that okay, after multiple generations, it is going to be continued like same way. So for something to be defined or classified as a breed, which is more of the geological term, you need to have a stable replication up to at least 3 generations. And that's where when you are saying this breed of dog I have, or this breed of this animal I have, it means they are going to show the same features and those properties in the multiple generation after a generation, which may not be case here, because what we just observed was one generation of the clone, and the clones were also having other issues, which was not that every clone was perfect. Clones also had some various other genetic defect, and many of them have obesity problem. So we cannot call them as a breed. But your question also brings the point of discussion that there are factors which are leading towards the not every clone to be same, right? And that we accept that every clone is not exactly same. There are many factors which are genetic factors and also epigenetic factors which are equally important, and they are going to lead to this kind of variability. And we just mentioned about X chromosome inactivation as one of the way of why this variability happened. In Dr. Shinya Yamanaka's experiment, how similar were the induced pluripotent stem cells formed to the original stem cells, and also what is the difference between these genes and transcription factors? So yeah, so Dr. Shinya Yamanaka, when he performed the experiment, he found that his iPS cells and embryonic stem-derived cells, they were actually having differences, like what we also have been discussing in other cases of cloning. And then they show different type of characterization and their developmental potency. And you can read this article if you want to go through the original papers. Uh, Coming to your other point, essentially, when we are looking at here the transcription factors are also the proteins which are controlling the expression of some genes. So all the transcription factors are essentially proteins, but all the proteins are not transcription factors, right? So that's like all the enzymes are protein, but all the proteins are not enzyme. Um I have somewhere, I think in maybe another discussion, Dr. Shina Yamanaka's experiment as well. I'll explain you about those transcription factors which he took and how he developed the induced pluripotency. In this slide, after mitosis, we see that there are 6 chromosomes, but each one of them has only one chromatid. So how is the sister chromatid produced? So I have a couple of these type of questions. Let me just flash 2, 3 questions. Although we have mentioned the response to your question as well, but I will give a common explanation to these questions. So this question is like that. Uh, Other question is the protein cohesin, as Professor said, joins the chromatids tightly, whereas according to the slide, the cohesin complex helps in separation of chromatids. It's a bit confusing. Please clarify. I think I've already mentioned, but I will again come back on this. So, yeah, so few questions are around these areas. So, see, main thing is in terms of, uh, let me go back this slide for the mitosis and chromosome and chromatids, right? So initially you have these chromosomes which are very thin, and when you are, the cell is reaching to the S phase and doing the, DNA replication is happening, cell is making more copies of these genetic material, it starts getting condensed, right? And during those condensation process, now these chromosomes, which are very thin, that becomes condensed, and you see now these sister chromatids produced. So now those sister chromatids that you see, they're actually ready for the division to happen, because now you are going to distribute these contents into two different cells. So now these sister chromatids are still attached to the same chromosome. So the chromosome was a thin thing, which over the time before the, after completing the S phase, it became quite thick. The sister chromatids became apparent. And after the division is about to happen after metaphase in the anaphase, and now the sister chromatids are going to get separated, and they are going to form the independent chromosomes. So I hope that clarifies this point. It is asked a couple of times. I will have more detail on that. At that point, I just clarified again that you have these chromatids are getting attached with the cohesin complex. Cohesin complex means there are a set of protein which is part of the cohesin complex, which are together trying to keep them adhered to each other, to the chromatids. But when the cells start to move to metaphase and going to anaphase, and they have to move apart, some repulsion has to happen, because they have to move to different poles, right, opposite poles. So that's where a set of enzyme known as separase, which is helping now this these two chromatids, which is getting attached with cohesin, to broke that part. And that's where again these are part of the cohesin complexes. Now some proteins are now going to play important role, and separase is going to break those bonds, and now these are going to pull apart and going to two different poles. So that's where there is the interplay of the set of the proteins belonging to cohesin complex, where they are going to keep it jointed, and then a protein named separase is going to keep them separate and in the two different poles. uh, okay, I looked at online for the evolution of the mitochondria, and I saw that the endoplasmic reticulum was already present in the cell. How do we know that the ER is older than the mitochondria? Why can it not be that ER evolved after the mitochondria? I think that's pretty interesting observation, and very good research mindset to think critically in this manner. Uh, so, see, I think endoplasmic reticulum is very important. We talked about two different type of endoplasmic reticulum: smooth endoplasmic reticulum and rough endoplasmic reticulum. So, rough ER is the one which is going to do the protein synthesis, and protein going to then get transported with the interplay of endomembranous system, right? So, it is really important for the protein transport inside the cytoplasm to the outside of the cell, like the post office. uh, the presence of endoplasmic reticulum is quite important, uh, you know, even prior to mitochondria, because it provides that scaffolding or that system where now the protein synthesis is happening, protein transport is happening, protein is going to get, after that through Golgi complex, it's going to go out of that. So if that environment is not present, I think it is difficult for cell to really survive. But I'm sure if you look into more literature, probably somebody would have done some experiment with the radioactive tracing or other kind of ways to try to decipher that whether ER came really evolved before the mitochondria, and what is the experimental proof for that. Can mitochondria chloroplast also become cancerous? Uh, do they have their own, since they have their own DNA, what could be the consequence of such a thing happening? And, I think this really nice that you're thinking along the right lines. Given that they have their own DNA, it is definitely possible that things can go uncontrolled. And there are, in fact, many genes which are linked to mitochondria, which are very crucial for different, they are also involved not only in cancer but also in different other diseases, right? I just showed one designer baby kind of example. So where many type of mitochondrial gene defects are there, and likewise it is possible that there are some mutations happen in these mitochondrial gene, and that may lead to cancer. And there are some research article which actually allude to this fact, so please do refer to these articles. Uh, so one could always think about, which things to target in cancer, right? Whether I should look for the cell cycle to control that, whether I should look at the mutations at the in the mitochondrial genes, or what other approaches I should take. There is no one answer to these questions right now. The people are trying different things, and but so far looks like there has not been much success targeting mitochondrial gene mutations for the cancer. Another question, comparing mitosis and meiosis. I think it is the same question that in the same line of questions about the sister chromatids, which are generated, are they part of the original cell? So, this figure again will clarify to many of you who have slightly, doubt into understanding of this part. I explained briefly. So the chromosome, what you see here, is now converting to the sister chromatid after the uh, chromosome duplication has already happened, or the DNA replication has completed. So now it has formed sister chromatids. And these sister chromatids are going to get divided eventually into two daughter cells, which is going to form the complete chromosome. And again, after complete duplication, that will again form the sister chromatids. And this is how the cycle is going to complete. Just for some of your various queries regarding number of chromosomes and chromatids in different stages, we have put together this slide, it for the mitosis and this slide for the meiosis, where now you can easily visualize the chromosome number at each stage as well as chromatid numbers. For instance, in the interphase of meiosis, as well as in the meiosis 1, the chromosome number is 46. After meiosis 1 is complete, meiosis 2 is happening. Now chromosome number is 23. Daughter nuclei has 23 chromosomes. Chromatid numbers are going to get duplicate here in the meiosis 1. That becomes 92. And then that becomes half of that, 46. And now we have 4 daughter cells, so became 23. Another question was something like, saying chromatids as a single chromosomes, or more precisely after duplication, we are saying each chromosome a chromatid. Again, that concept is explained here, but that figure was probably a very good explanation that how that chromosome get condensed, makes two chromatids, chromatids get separated. Again, they form the, after replication, they form two chromatids again. Okay, so the student have studied bio earlier. Which part of the textbook one should study for understanding the cell cycle again? It all depends on at what depth and length you want to study. Just from the course point of view, the slides which I'm putting together, I think those are quite self-explanatory. But also on the slide, I'm adding the figure and the page numbers. So at least you should read this much detail from the Campbell book. Go back to Campbell book and go to those figure numbers and the page numbers and read that description so that you can understand that part in the context. This is the minimum requirement. But of course, you can read the full chapters of chapter 12, 13 for this part to give you really good understanding, comprehensive understanding. And of course, if you want to go beyond that, many of your classmates, I can see that they're thinking quite aloud. You can always read some research articles where we can guide you or provide you if you have more interest. It is hard to digest the fact that nucleoli disappears in one phase and starts forming in the other phase. Of course, there are many surprises in this part of the cell division to happen, because several things are disappearing and then reappearing. And those contents, many times, it's not disappearing or totally reappearing, but they are very low and they becomes condensed and becomes much more higher in concentration. So you can say low concentration than higher concentration. But many things which we also see is also because of the way staining is being done, and sometimes the stainings cannot detect if the concentration is very low for these. Nevertheless, I think the entire cell division process is very regulated, and these things are making sure that now cell after division is making exact replica of the two cells, and the chromosome contents are distributed in daughter cells. So the disappearing and reappearing is actually happening in the reality and is already experimentally verified. What are the genes? Basically, I think we have talked a couple of times, but again, these are the stretch of DNA which has capacity to make the functional messenger RNA, messenger ribonucleic acid molecules, and they can. So this process of DNA to RNA formation known as transcription, and from RNA, then one could make the functional proteins, which is known as translation. Which genes play a role in Dr. Yamanaka experiment? I think I will show shortly. Second layer on mitochondria and plastids formed due to more cohesive forces of cytoplasm so that it remains separated from the mitochondrial layer. Um, all right, I think this is, you have tried to understand this. If you again think in totality that, how a cell would have engulfed in that eukaryotic cell and became part of it. So the outer and inner membranes, they actually stay separate. And due to the matrix and the protein, which is between the two layers, they are able to communicate and transport the signal. So that will probably clarify your doubt. On slide 24, what are those microfilaments in the cleavage furrow? Again, we talked about different cytoskeletal elements which are important in the cell division process, especially for the cell to divide into two cells. And these microfilaments in the cleavage furrow or the cell plates are doing the same role. Uh, I think you can just read this part with the more detail of the proteins like myosin, which are important role which they are playing, and that's how you can see this type of microfilaments making these cell furrows. I think in the previous one of the questions as well as now, the Yamanaka experiment was being asked. So these transcription factors are the one which are transcribing the genes into the messenger RNA in a very particular time in a particular cell. And Yamanaka used four of these transcription factors, which is OCT4, SOX2, c-MYC, and KLF4. And when he fused these stem cells with these transcription factors, that resulted into the induced pluripotent stem cell or iPS cells. So I hope the experiment is now clear to you. We saw that keeping the cell or root in the culture media naturally without anything done by us, de-differentiated and grew into the carrot. But how does the same not happen when it was on the original carrot itself and another carrot did not grew out of the root? All right. So, this is one of the example when we talked for the carrot. In this case, the cell does not have that capacity to really completely make the full carrot itself. But the cells are totipotent and these cells have capacity. If you can give them the right medium and hormones, they can de-differentiate and form the new type of root and shoot. Growth can happen, but for that to trigger, you need to provide separately the gibberellic acid, cytokinin, these kind of hormones. But nevertheless, in other cases, like you see banyan tree, right? Like it will just bend, and after some time, with just by looking at things from the obtaining nutrient from the nature itself, is able to make its own multiple branches and multiple copies. There are many other examples of different plants from just the leaf falls down, and those leaves grow into the full tree or full of full new plant. So different plants have different capacity as well in that way. In this case, we have to provide exogenously from outside these hormones to trigger that kind of root. Is it possible to perform artificial endosymbiosis? It was, I think, an interesting question we in D1 batch also we had. And answer to that is, the natural process of endosymbiosis or cell engulfing and becoming part of the eukaryotic cell was very long process. Attempting to do that kind of experiment is going to be challenging because you have to mimic that kind of earth atmosphere and those conditions. And but if you really wish to do that, you have to then involve a lot of knowledgeable scientists and people of the field who are biologists, biochemists, bioinformatician, assistant biologists, synthetic biologists, who can try to understand this experiment better and then try to relate that part, right? Nevertheless, there are research going on in this area, and people are looking at how to exploit these kind of thoughts and nature into different products. And there are different, type of products already coming out based on this concept, which you can read in this particular article. We will also talk about how biotechnology can help making various type of products and the concepts of cloning. And that I'm going to talk in the lecture 4. So we can take some of these points of discussion again at that time. If the gene number do not explain organism complexity, does it signify something else? We talked about gene numbers in context of when we talked about human has around 20,000 genes, Arabidopsis, C. elegans, and fruit fly, Drosophila. Different organism, when the genomes projects got completed, they all had almost similar number of genes, not very drastically different. So whether that reflects the kind of organism complexity, that was the question which I raised. And I think you have asked the right question in that direction. But nevertheless, genome complexity and organisms complexity, they're not correlated. For example, some protists, like, some protozoans like amoeba, they have almost 200-fold longer genome as compared to the mammals like human, if you look at here. So the genome size is actually not truly reflecting the complexity of a given organism. So, and this concept that the genome size and complexity of organism is not directly correlated is known as C-value paradox. So, which says that in a amount of DNA in a haploid genome does not seem to correspond strongly to the complexity of an organism, and therefore the C values can be extremely variable. Can we not decrease the time of preparation of the cell in the interphase? Uh, Interphase is crucial for the cell organelle replications, as you know, and for preparing the biomolecules for the cell division to happen. So, in the normal growth phenomenon, that will be detrimental. Nevertheless, interphase can have different connotation. Again, you want to restrict the cell at the GO phase, before it proceeds to G1. So you might want to, play with these cell cycle conditions for different type of activity, and lot of developmental concepts are also linked to this part of interplay with the interface, but that is not in the scope of right now discussion. What exactly is cyclins and cyclin-dependent kinases? So these are both proteins, right? Cyclins, these are essentially produced in the process when the S phase replication is happening. So then they get higher concentration of this protein. Whereas CDKs, cyclin dependent kinases, these are present throughout the cell cycle, so they are always there. Now these kinases, when we say the kinase is the group of the protein which is able to transfer the phosphate from one set of protein to other set of proteins, and those reactions are known as phosphorylation reaction. Or if you remove that phosphate, that's known as dephosphorylation reaction. So these are very important signals to drive any type of biological signaling cascade. So in the process here, when the cyclin is very high in the concentration, which is bit synthesized in the S phase, CDK is coming, and the two are making that complex. Now then we have these maturation promoting factors, which is getting associated, and now they are forming that complex. Then after mitosis get complete, cyclin is getting degraded, and CDKs are again released for the next cycle to continue. So again, the set of the protein and the protein receptors, their interplay is important for the cell cycle to operate properly. The lipopolysaccharides, as described in the video, are used for following passage of small molecules. What are the small molecules, and does gram positive also have something which allow passage for small molecules? All right. Well, when we say these small molecules, it means proteins are large molecules which are having higher molecular weights. Small molecules are essentially various type of drug molecule, the stains. Uh, so these kind of molecules, when we are talking in the context of the staining, we are looking at whether they are able to cross these membranes, right? And that's where this permeability barrier becomes very important. And that's where, if you again think about the gram staining, when we are thinking about different stains to go penetrate these lipopolysaccharides and penetrates the these membrane, then this process of forming the divalent cations to with the permeability barrier becomes important. Again, for explanation, I will leave this slide to you. You can read that in detail. What is the difference between kinetochore and non-kinetochore microtubule? We have talked about it, but again, in the context here, kinetochore microtubules are the one which is going to help to align these chromosomes on the metaphase, and then further segregation of the sister chromosomes or the homologous chromosome. These are the kinetochore microtubules, which is shown here. Now then we also have the non-kinetochore microtubules, which is essentially helping in the elongation of the cell during the cell division to happen. So both are crucial, but they play a slightly different role. What are the substratum of anchorage and their function? So for anything to grow, if you get any surface when it can attach, that is the substrate, right? You hear in lime substrate reactions. So likewise, for a cell to grow, if a cell gets an environment where it can get a contact and attach there, it will start rapidly growing. And that's where the normal cell, they try to find a niche area where they are growing, like heart cell and liver cell. So every cell is growing in that type of niche, and they are very specialized for doing that. But a cancer cell, they do not obey that part, and even without having any kind of anchor to attach the substrate, they're still able to move around and grow further. Why are the processes such as transcription and what are the processes of these transcription translation? Why the RNA proteins can't be present by default? And how do we know that these processes are taking place and the RNA and protein are not present there from the beginning? Of course, these are interesting thoughts, but some basics which I think we have to study here. As we just also discussed earlier, that DNA is going to form the messenger RNA, which is more functional molecule, and those messenger RNAs are going to form the protein with the process known as translation. So transcription was to make DNA to RNA, and then translation to make the protein. Now, if this process of making the functional molecule from the gene is going to require a lot of energy, right? So from the DNA to RNA formation or RNA to protein formation is a dynamic process. For example, right now your cell needs, on accident side, you need lot of blood is loss is happening, and you want blood clotting to happen. So a lot of clotting factors are being synthesized, and they are being transported to that site. So now cell has to really produce those a lot. So it is going to really need a lot of ATP, very dynamic. To cope up with any kind of infection, our body has to come up with more kind of immune protein responses to try to combat that. And likewise, for many diseases, first initially body's defense system start working towards that. They synthesize those protein, try to fight with those organisms, and then after a time, then that interplay decides you are able to survive or not. Nevertheless, to do this process, you need to consume a lot of energy or utilize a lot of energy. That's where you are not going to make these proteins in the abundance, higher abundance all the time. Another thought here is that every cell is not going to make every type of protein all the time, because if the brain cell requires for the neurons some specialized signals, it's going to consume energy to make those proteins only in the brain cell, in the neurons. Why it will make the same protein synthesis in the heart cell or in the liver cell? So this is energy consumption process. It's going to be selective in that way, and that's where you don't see them synthesized throughout, and they are more dynamic molecule which will be synthesized as per the requirement. But of course, most of them are already going to be there, but their abundance, wherever there is a need, then they're going to be highly synthesized according to the requirements. So given the timing is getting short and I have still many queries, let me move on. If we are able to control cancer, like manipulate it in such a way that it can be induced when required and stop on our will be able to achieve regeneration or fast healing techniques like a lizard does it to its tail. I think we definitely need, these kind of out of the box ideas. And if any of these really works, probably we have conquered the cancer. Somehow, unfortunately, so far it has not been so easy. People are trying different ways of controlling cancer, but it has not worked out so easily. I'll just show you one slide to give you some research idea. I think you are really thinking in the research direction. Uh, while this idea, what you have proposed, is not feasible as of now or not working experimentally so far, but nevertheless, I think there are certain research going on in the light of what you are thinking, which I will tell. Then that can help you to read along those lines and see, like, how best we can come up with the newer ways of controlling cancer. Another interesting thought, like in the same manner, like lysosomes are societal bag. Uh, can't this process be utilized in treating cancer? So I think many of you started thinking, and that thought process and that spark in your brain, that itself shows that this course has started serving its purpose. That you have started thinking beyond the just the normal thought processes, and you are coming out of the box. Think about a context of cancer chemotherapy. So in cancer chemotherapy, what happens when any individual is diagnosed with cancer? Doctors are going to do either the surgery to remove the tumor, or they're going to do radiation to try to control that tumor if it's still very benign. So in either case, you're trying to first either remove the cancer or try to suppress the cancer and control that cancer. But nevertheless, the cancer cells can, very quickly move from one to other place, and they can, really cause cancer in the more advanced stage. So therefore, the chemotherapies are being given, and even after even doing surgery, it is possible some cells are still left. You want to control those. So again, you are giving some drugs which can inhibit these cells. What these drugs do, these drugs are not very selective, unfortunately. These chemicals, what the cocktail of the drugs are given to the patients, it is essentially trying to control the tumor growth. So any cell which is very highly rapidly generated, it is going to kill those cells. This is very non-selective. Therefore, even body's own growth and development, that gets stopped at that time. Lot of cells are getting killed with these chemicals, with these chemotherapy, and therefore you see these individuals are having lot of variations, lot of side effects, lot of hair fall is happening, immune system go down. All of this because the chemicals given is not very selective. Now, your thought is, I think, in very right direction. There are, in fact, efforts. Can we have the nanoparticle or the drug delivery systems like in a bag, which really goes and triggers to the cancer site, and only burst open when it sees those cancer cells, rather than trying to kill every single cell at that time, rapidly dividing cells. Why not it just only goes and looks selectively the cancer cell, adheres to that, and then try to do this something similar what you thought for cytal bags. So these are nice idea, and I think it is something where a lot of researchers are also thinking along those lines. I think to some of you who have asked some interesting questions about various therapies for the cancer, I recommend you to read this paper, which is available in the annual reviews of cancer biology. It shows that at different stages of the cell cycle inhibitors, checkpoints, different type of clinical trials are going on right now. There are different drugs which are currently being used for different type of cell cycle phase to control, and how they are making an impact, or where they are actually staying. So please do look into this paper when you get interesting thoughts like this and more time to read about that. I'm still seeing many hands. Please allow me to continue because timing is getting short. I will come back to each one of you and make sure we talk before we close. So now coming to the third part, third lecture, metabolism, Q&A. Some questions are being asked here. What is chlorophyll A, B? Specifically, what is chlorophyll A and what is chlorophyll B? Uh, I think, this really brings back to a lot more basics. Chlorophyll A is a key light capturing pigment that participates directly in the light reactions. Chlorophyll B and carotenoids, those are more accessory pigments, which are also important for that photosystems to be performing well. Uh, but chlorophyll A here is the most important one. Did not get what exactly classifying chlorophyll means and corresponding to different graphs for them. So these chlorophyll structure, I think you can look into in some more detail. There is a porphyrin ring, there's a hydrocarbon tail, and there is a difference in the side chain group here with the CH3 methyl group and the aldehyde groups. And so then I think that can help you to understand the difference in the structure. But we are not going in that level of detail for the this stage of the photosynthesis to be studied. I think at some point I had mentioned about some of our own work on the brain tumors, where I showed this slide and one of you have asked the question. These parts are anything which I tell for the food for thought will not be for the examination, but just for your curiosity, since you asked here. When we were working on this problem of brain tumors, uh, we had no idea that what we are going to look at, what type of autoantibodies being produced in the serum of these brain tumor patients, which are having different grades of glioma disease of grade 2, 3, and 4. So in the brain, there is a blood-brain barrier there, which is going to restrict the movement of those proteins to move from the brain to the blood. What we are trying to look at, we are trying to look at the proteins which have been released in the blood, right? So when the early grade disease is there, there is a blood-brain barrier is still intact, so proteins are not able to infiltrate much and not able to move out much. Whereas as soon as the disease reach to the grade 3, which is now higher grade, the blood-brain barrier is breaching out, or broken now, and now you see like huge infiltration of large number of autoantibodies that time. So that was the we had surprise observation as well. Now, your question is that why we don't see much here in case of the grade 4 and more here in the grade 3. So in this case of the brain tumor, while in other cancer, it might have been different situation that grade 2, 3, and 4 have the linear increase. But in this situation here in the brain tumor, grade 4 is the glioblastoma multiforme, which is deadly, almost from grade 3 to 4, patient is almost dying, in the 6 months to 1 year time. So everything is shutting down. The entire body system, all the immune system is all shutting down. And that's probably reflected that, most of the proteins have given up and things are all machinery is shutting down. And that probably could be reason why we saw less numbers here. But anyway, I can talk to you about this and our research if you have interest at some point separately. What is actually the need of generating complex molecules from the small molecules? Of course, we are talking about non-metabolism of the catabolism and anabolism, and that is very important for each one of the important molecules like nucleic acid. If you say being synthesized from nucleotides in DNA, RNA, you have the carbohydrates, coming, which is forming the starch or glycogens, amino acids forming different type of proteins. So these small entities are forming the large entities, and you have seen the examples. I will give you again in catabolism and anabolism, which we know it is one of them is degradative process, which is going to take these kind of fuel material for the food, going to convert them to the energy formation with the release of carbon dioxide and water. Anabolism, you are going to synthesize these with the addition of the energy. You are taking the small molecules together, making the complex molecules like carbohydrates and proteins. Uh, all right, so this one is no question, but you have really asked me the answer of your exams. Uh, but to be really clear to all of you, I think my intention is also that you should not spend time in memorizing a lot of cycles and the reactions. So whether we talked about glycolysis or Krebs cycle or oxidative phosphorylation, any of those, I would not expect you to know all the intermediates, what are those steps involved and what are the enzymes involved. But what I'd actually expect you to know that from where the cycle starts, what is the end product being formed, and what are the molecules being released. In this slide, let me review very quickly the metabolism, which will be your next quiz tomorrow, to give you some key concepts here. What is expectation out of this part, that what you should definitely know. And of course, you would have gone through my lecture beforehand. So here again, to touch upon the catabolism and anabolism concepts here, when the respiration is happening, that is the catabolism, which is generating ATP, which is when the anabolism is happening in the photosynthesis process. So now you are taking these carbon dioxide, water molecules, you are synthesizing these large molecules. These large molecules are getting broken down with the respiration, ATP being generated. Just to summarize what we learned in the photosynthesis and what are the key points which you should definitely keep in mind. Essentially that we have two reactions. One is light reaction, other is dark reaction or the light independent reaction, also known as Calvin cycle. In light reaction, there is the involvement of light. In the presence of water, water is getting broken down, oxygen being released. In the process, you also see ATP and NADPH being released, which is going to be utilized in the dark cycle or the Calvin cycle. The stable product of that is glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. Important point to note. And that's why this is known as C3 cycle, because this product is 3-carbon compound. So these are the only thing which I'm hoping that you should know. And in the Calvin cycle or the dark cycle, CO2 intake is there, which is releasing the formation of the carbohydrate or the sugars. In the light reaction, more specifically, there are two different ways of electron transport system. One goes from the cyclic formation, other goes into, non-cyclic formation here, other goes the cyclic formation here. So in the non-cyclic, there's involvement of both the photosystem 2 and photosystem 1. Photosystem 2 involves P680, which is the important primary acceptor. Photosystem 1 involves P700 primary acceptor. So here in the photosystem 2, there is a hydrolysis of water happening and now the oxygen being released. Now these primary acceptors, these are electron transport is happening through the plastoquinone to cytochrome B complex to the plastocyanins. And then they are activating now the P700 primary acceptors, which is now activating the activities with the ferredoxin protein and forming NADPH. So keep in mind the byproducts here. You have oxygen getting released, ATP being formed, NADPH being formed. And what you are utilizing two photosystem 2 and 1. Whereas in case of the cyclic reaction, which will happen, which will only involve photosystem 1, which will happen like this here, you will not have any activities here, you will not have any activity here. So no oxygen release, no NADPH formation, and all you are doing, you are just synthesizing ATP with this particular cycle. So Kelvin cycle, I don't want you to know all the intermediates, all the stuff, but you should keep in mind that the 3-carbon sugar glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate is a stable product, and that's why we know them as a C3 cycle. C4 cycle, here the important point to note is that you are having the stable compound form as a oxaloacetic acid or OAA, and that product is why it is a C4 carbon product. That's why you say this as a C4 cycle. C4 and the CAM cycle or crystallization acid metabolism cycle, this happens in those plants which are in the deserted condition or in the arid condition, and therefore they have a different mechanism to cope up with that environment, where in the daytime their stomata remains closed, they try to conserve that, and only in the night they are going to perform these activities. So again, the key points to note is the mesophyll cell and bundle sheath cell, their chloroplast has this variation, and they are going to not from the C3 compound, but the C4 compound. So I'm not going to expect any more detail from you on this slide. Cellular respiration involves glycolysis, pyruvate oxidation, TCA cycle, oxidative phosphorylation. These are the key steps involved. In glycolysis, while I have shown you 10 major steps which are involved, I would not expect you to know all their names and all their enzymes, but what you should know that from glucose, there is a pyruvate, two molecules of pyruvate being formed, ATP being released, two NADH molecule being released. There is a process in the phase which requires energy, which spends energy, ATP, and then ATP being produced. Net gain is more of the ATP, and that's why you see two positive ATP being produced. Then intermediate step is pyruvate oxidation. When glycolysis to the TCA cycle, that change is happening from the cytosol. Pyruvate is now moving to the acetyl coenzyme A in that form to the mitochondria. Now this particular acetyl CoA is going to further get oxidized in the citric acid cycle, and that is going to form different intermediary products, which we are not talking right now, which essentially we will focus on what is the byproducts of that, what is NADH molecules, FADH molecule being produced, but I'll not ask you what are all intermediate steps and their names. Then it comes to the electron transport chain, and here again key points to keep in mind that we have these complexes, which is 1, 2, 3, 4 complex, but for the NADH 1, 3, and 4, these three complexes are being involved to produce the ATP, which is producing 3 ATP, and for FADH2 that is going to involve only 3 complex 3 and 4, and 2 ATPs are being produced. So we are not going to ask very detailed questions on this area, but rather some overview. You should keep in mind that how from glucose to pyruvate being formed, during that process you are having 2 net gain of ATP with the substrate level phosphorylation, acetyl CoA being formed, which is now shuffling to the citric acid cycle. It is also going to produce substrate level phosphorylation, some ATP. Then you are going to take these NADH, FADH2 with oxidative phosphorylation, total 26 or 28 ATP being formed, total 30 or 32 ATP being formed in the entire process. One of the TAs that really helped me well to put this PPT together to show each of these steps and what is the net gain of NADH, FADH, and ATP. I think you should keep this PPT in mind to see how best you can understand this overall ATP net gain. Some of you had asked some questions from the first quiz, and I'm just quickly giving the right answer for that. So some of you also asked me to provide you the quiz for your reference. Again, this videos are going to be available, so you will have access to all the questions and their answers as well. So this question, which organelle one could least expect the presence of genetic elements? Of course, chloroplast, mitochondria, nucleus have their own DNA, so plasma membrane will be the right answer. Incorrect for studying cells using microscopy. We were discussing earlier about live cell and the dead cell. So TEM, you will look for the dead cells. Important feature of a protein that is solely required for its function. See, for the, of course, we have not spoken about the protein in great detail, but for the proper functioning of a protein to happen, for its folding to happen, it needs 3-dimensional conformation, which is very important. And that's what was this question being asked. Scientist Carl Wood, who did this classification, and we looked into that based on the 16S ribosomal RNA. Not a function of the Golgi apparatus. Golgi apparatus is not a mitochondria to generate ATP, but it will help the proteins to transport and move out of the cell. Organisms which led to the energy saving or energy efficient inventions, termite, that inspiration was for the East Gate building, and Kingfisher for the Shinkansen train. Clinical sample testing for the DNA, and that's where we showed a couple of techniques to you. Agarose electrophoresis is one of the technique, and polymerase chain reaction. We have real-time PCR. So some of these techniques we are going to talk in a lot more detail in the lecture 4. You will then understand the basics, but at least we have spoken about them in the DNA context in the class. So I thought to give a question on that. The staining procedure, I think, was quite straightforward when you are looking at two stains with the crystal violet and the you are doing decolorization with ethanol and then do saffron in another stain. So probably you're mistaken to not add the saffron stain. That's why, yeah, this could have happened here. And we have given a context of both the gram-negative and gram-positive cell. And this was the straightforward question to look for the total number of nucleotide pairs which are present in the double-stranded DNA. You have to look for the nucleotide pairs, the length of that DNA, which is around 2 meters, and then derive the nucleotides. A bacterial cell divides into two daughter cells. You are looking at the doubling time of the bacteria. So that takes 20 minutes. So from 2.5 to 5 million cell, it will take 20 minutes. Then from 5 to 10, it will again take next 20 minutes, total 40 minutes. All right. I hope that pretty much covers most of the stuff from my side here right now. So